Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Happy Father's Day to all. We're joined this morning by former state senator and Yarmouth town councilor Phil Harriman and former state senator and mayor of Portland, Ethan Strimling. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The primary for 2022 is in our rear view mirror. Let's talk about some of the results. Bruce Poliquin wins the CD2 primary over Liz Caruso. Is there any message in an underfunded newcomer getting about 40% of the vote against an established former congressman with way more money and way more name recognition, Phil?
Oh, absolutely. If this was the general election and Poliquin won 60-40, we'd be saying what a landslide victory, but in a primary against a relatively unknown, there's a message there for the Poliquin campaign that you better not look away from your base. They're curious as to what you really are going to do if you're elected.
You know, his avoiding the issues, avoiding taking stands, avoiding debates, all of that stuff didn't help him. I will say that it's an open seat. It's not like he is the incumbent. He hasn't been in that seat for a few years. So there's always going to be some protest vote. You would expect it to be 20-25%. The fact that it was up to 40, he certainly has some mending of fences to do. That said, I expect Republicans are going to be lockstep by the fall and will be uniting around him because he's very conservative, probably more conservative than a lot of folks up there anyway.
We're going to be seeing a virtual rematch of 2018 in the fall in that race with Poliquin, the incumbent Democrat Jared Golden, and independent Tiffany Bond. How do you handicap that race right now?
I think it's Jared Golden's race to lose, no doubt about it. I think he's in a strong position. He's taken votes that meet with the expectations of his constituents up there. I think the factor is really what the turnout is going to look like. This is going to be a Republican year. Paul LePage on the ticket is going to turn out Republicans in the northern part of the state. He's their most motivating factor. Can Poliquin hang on to those coattails or not, I think is really where it's going to be. But no doubt, this is Jared Golden's race to lose.
Bill?
You know, I think Ethan has summed it up accurately. The key from my perspective is, does Poliquin motivate enough people so that Republicans who don't stay home, and motivate independents to come vote for him as opposed to not voting or voting for Golden?
That's almost always the key in these races, is where do the unenrolled and independent voters go?
Well, first, do they show up? Do they care enough to vote? And then where do they go?
Speaking of showing up, one of the things, as Ethan referred to, is that Bruce Poliquin had a policy in this campaign. We're not going to do a debate or a forum with a candidate who doesn't have X number of dollars, is not a serious candidate in their eyes. You have Tiffany Bond, the independent, who famously does not raise money. That's part of her platform. Will Bruce Poliquin be able to play that same game, or will he have to show up?
He has to show up. I think there's a distinction between the insider's game amongst the political scientists giving advice and we the people who want to know who you are and what you believe in and what are your priorities. And to me, that should be where you spend your time, because we get to vote.
The script will be flipped. He wants to debate now. He wants to get Golden in the room. Golden will be the one who will probably be saying more often than not, I'm going to limit the number of debates, et cetera. He's in the lead. So Poliquin's going to have to jump into that. So yes, of course, the hypocrisy from one race to the next is remarkable for every party, for sure. But yes, Poliquin will show up at debates and want as many as possible.
One of the big contested races was Cumberland County District Attorney Democratic primary. That was won big by Jackie Sartoris over the incumbent Jonathan Sarbeck. Now, there were few big policy differences between them, but Sartoris benefited from nearly $400,000 from a PAC funded by Democratic mega donor George Soros. This became far and away the most money ever spent on a DA race in Maine. Ethan, did that money work, or did Democrats simply decide they like Jackie Sartoris better than the former Republican Jonathan Sarbeck?
Well, I think it's both. Jackie is a very established, member of the legal community. She's somebody people know. She's a reformer. I think it's important to recognize that Sarbeck had not been a Democrat in the past, and Jackie was, so that was important. And I think she won this seat on her own credentials, but obviously the money had an impact. That margin was very wide to take out an incumbent. And money, unfortunately, until the Supreme Court changes its rules, until it decides money is not speech, we are going to have this kind of money is going to come in. And
we had ads who were at times misleading at best, but there they are. And there was a pretty strong barrage of them over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, we've talked about this before on Political Brew, about the political science behind campaigns. This is a perfect example. There's no Republican running in the general election, so this was the election. The Soros money that came in was able to put a ton of money directed at people who care enough in the Democrat caucus to go vote, And so a relatively small percentage of Cumberland County residents have now elected the new DA. A stroke of political science at its best.
The race for governor is now officially set, and no surprise, Governor Janet Mills will square off against former Governor Paul LePage and dark horse independent Sam Hunkler. Phil, is this going to play out really as a head-to-head race with Mills and LePage, or is Hunkler going to be a factor at all?
I think it's a head-to-head race. I don't know if Hunkler is going to be able to access the public funding aspect of it. If he does, that'll give him a little bit more awareness, but people clearly know who Mills and LePage. You couldn't have a more stark contrast, and both have been there, both want the job again. I think that's where the public is going to focus their attention.
It's the heavyweight fight, Ethan.
It is for sure, and it's kind of the one we've all been wanting, right? I mean, look, Mills and LePage went toe-to-toe for 8 years as she was AG and he was governor, and those battles were always both ideological, they were smart, they had serious policy differences. Having those laid out for the voters, I think, is going to give us a very clear choice. You know, LePage is going to have to overcome the are we going to go backwards? And I think Mills has to overcome kind of the, people are feeling very worried about the economy and where we're going. And how do each of them answer that question, I think, is really going to be where this lands.
And one more local race to talk about. Democrats held their ground in a special election to fill a vacancy in Hancock County. State Representative Nicole Grohosky won the District 7 Senate seat with 64% of the vote over former State Senator Brian Langley. Now, the Republican Party now calls this a low-stakes race compared to the rematch that will come in the fall for a full term in that seat in November. Ethan, a lot of people expected this one to be closer, so Democrats get a little bragging rights out of this, a little bit of hope, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, we've been winning all these special elections in this apparently Republican year, but the fact that she won with almost 2/3 of the vote is remarkable. Remember, this seat has been held, back in Phil's days, was held by an independent, right? And then it was held by a Democrat, then it was held by a Republican.
It's a swing seat.
This is a swing seat. Republicans now want to claim, oh, this was a Democratic seat anyway. It certainly wasn't. She did a great job. She's been a real champion in the House, and I think Republicans are going to be on their heels trying to win this seat back.
It's just interesting to me that we're discussing a race which the person raises their right hand to take office and there's nothing to do because the legislature's out of session.
Right.
To me, Pat, what momentum came out of this special election can she carry over into the fall?
Let's talk about some national issues now. Senate gun reform proposal, the compromise bill, is to include incentives for states and tribes to create red flag laws, which allow guns to be taken from people who are a danger to themselves and others. It's something negotiators agreed would not violate the Second Amendment. It would also allow a background check into the juvenile records of teenagers and provide a boost to school and community mental health treatment. Senator Angus King told us this week that the time is of the essence, meaning this bill should be passed quickly before lobbyists pick it apart. Phil, is he correct? And do you think this is going to get enacted once the final bill is in place?
Yeah, he is correct, and I hope it is enacted. I'm proud to say in Maine we already have similar laws in place. If they need to be tightened, we should, because we know what these people do, we know how they do it. We're now understanding why they do it. And they're doing it because they come from dysfunctional families, they've been bullied, they have mental health issues, they commit a crime against someone in their own family before they act out, and they attack the school that they attended. We know why they're doing this. Let's see if we can put an end to this, finally.
Well, they're also doing it because they have access to weapons of mass destruction, and that's the unfortunate part about this bill, right? There's always been dysfunctional kids from tough families when we were growing up, right? When we were growing up, we would pull the fire alarm. Well, now you have access to an assault weapon, and that's what happens. That's the unfortunate part of this bill. It doesn't actually address some of the most significant reforms that need to be put in place around actual guns. But Senator King is 1,000% correct. I would not put the odds on this passing above 50-50 at the moment because it's so early. And we know that every time something that makes immense sense, like universal background checks, that everybody thought, okay, this is the moment after Sandy Hook, it only got 54 votes, 54, 55 votes, and it died. So they need to move. They need to move quickly, and I don't know if it will pass. I hope so.
The committee in Congress looking into the January 6 riots at the U.S. Capitol held two more public hearings this past week. The first made the case that President Trump was told by family and top advisors that there was no evidence to prove Trump's claims of a stolen election were true. but he kept repeating the claims, raising millions of dollars while doing so. The second focused on the pressure being put on Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to certify Joe Biden's election. Ethan, what's the impact of what's been presented so far?
You know, I hope the American people are watching this, because if you watch it, it's very compelling. The evidence is very strong, and I think it's getting tighter and tighter around Donald Trump's responsibility and culpability in what occurred. It wasn't simply his words at one rally. It was the lead up to that, before the election, after the election, and what he was doing to people around him who were trying to tell him the truth. And he refused to hear it and instead wanted a group of people to overturn an election that the American people had already completed and install him as president. That is obviously against our Constitution. It's traitorous. And hopefully, as this commission keeps going forward, the Attorney General is paying close attention. We cannot allow a man like that to try to get back to the White House again.
Phil?
You know, it just seems to me that if you're watching the hearings, I'd like to know who's changed their mind, who's watched the hearings and said, oh, I think differently than when I first tuned in, and let the fact remain that the Constitution was upheld. Mike Pence did not yield under all this pressure that Ethan's referring to, so I'm eager to see what's in the next 4 hearings that they're going to present that shows us why Donald Trump should be indicted.
Isn't perhaps the most important thing just to have this all laid out on the record so people know what happened? Of course, you can't change what happened before, and it depended upon the goodwill of some people who might otherwise have been loyal to the president.
Sure, and for historic purposes, yes, we should. Let's make sure it's the whole story and that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, we need to be clear that just because the Constitution was upheld doesn't mean that this was okay. It doesn't mean that these weren't violations of the same Constitution. You can try to rob a bank and fail, but that doesn't mean you didn't try to rob a bank. And I think that's what being a traitor is. Every traitor in American history for the last 200 and almost 50 years has failed, thankfully, but every other traitor has been prosecuted. That's what has to be understood here.
And if you're right, the facts will prove that that was traitorous and he will be indicted.
I think the facts are already there. The question is, are people willing to see that and take the action?
And what will the Justice Department do?
Right.
Big question. The main turnout, the primary turnout this past week was very low, which is not uncommon. What do you guys think? Would Maine be better off moving its primaries back to September, the way New Hampshire still does, when perhaps people can be more focused on politics?
I don't actually think so. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that shows September has a higher turnout, and I actually think in June, before the summer, is a good time, and it also gives all of us a good 5 or 6 months to actually learn about these candidates before we get to the general election. So I don't think that waiting September would turn up the turnout, and I also don't think that that would then give enough window, because you have to think about the other side of that. That means you've only got 45, 60 days to get to know the candidates.
Well, I think some people would welcome that.
They might, that's true.
Shortening the process is, I'm all in favor of that, but I do see Ethan's point of view, and maybe what we need to do is to make sure that there is enough contrast out there for people to care about. When you have so many races, whether it's for a select person or school board or state senate or whatever, that doesn't have a competing candidate, who's going to care?
Right.
Yeah, there were a lot of, especially at the top of the ticket,
Right.
no competition,
Right.
so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up with our winners and losers in politics this week. Phil, we'll start with you.
I'm going to start by the loser I want to mention is the Portland Press Herald. And the reason I say that is because 8 years ago, Mike Eads, a Republican running for sheriff, was the beneficiary of a PAC to help him, and they vilified him. This time, with the district attorney's race, you didn't hear much. Mm-hmm. My winner, to all the dads out there who stand up and speak up for their children, and for the parents and the graduates who are graduating from high schools and colleges, you're a winner.
Hear, hear. Ethan?
Yeah, similarly on this week with the congratulations, this is the weekend of Pride, this is the weekend of Juneteenth. These are very important holidays, these are very important celebrations in terms of African American freedom and in terms of LGBT rights. So to those communities out there, they are the winners of the week, hopefully for all of us. My loser of the week, looking at the hearings, is Ginny Thomas. Clarence Thomas's wife. She is in a lot of trouble now. It's turning out that she was working much harder than we realized to try to overturn that election and violate our Constitution. So I think she's in trouble.
Ethan Strimling, Phil Harriman, thanks so
Good to
much.
see you, Phil.
Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.